Welcome to the Metamorphosis Podcast, hosted by Nora Brucker in Germany and myself, Erin Howe, in the United States. In this podcast, we talk to people about transformation and the moments and events that change us. We hope you enjoy. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Metamorphosis Podcast. Along for our chat today, we have a retired Air Force pilot turned financial advisor. In Steve's last year in the Air Force before retirement, he survived a plane crash. It wasn't the type of plane crash, though, that one might think of when they think of an Air Force pilot. And I must admit that this was a much more lighthearted interview than I anticipated going into it. I'll let him tell this story.
I would say that my life was pretty straightforward from the time I was an only child and we lived out in the country. So I had a lot of time to figure out my plan, if you will. Reading a lot of books and, with only the influence of my parents most of the time. So I kind of knew I wanted to go in the military, and I saw Top Gun. So after that, I was like, I have to go be a fighter pilot because that looks like a lot of fun. And I would like to serve my country in that capacity. And so I was able to make all that happen. I went through an engineering degree. So when you kind of think of my background up through turning 40, it was kind of a very straightforward, there, everything is black and white, not a lot of gray. It was very mission accomplished. It was very, here's what's next in line of what I'm going to do with my life. And where I would say I experienced the most major change was right towards the end of my Air Force career. I had a plane crash. And of course, when your listeners hear that, they're going to think, oh no, an F-15 or an F-117, multi-million-dollar big fiery plane crash. That wasn't it at all. It was basically a small experimental aircraft that after, thousands of hours of flying, high performance aircraft and in combat and being shot at and landing at night in weather and all these difficult conditions, that what was going to get me, because I thought I was going to pass away when the crash actually happened right before I hit the ground, I resigned. And it was I was upset because of all the things that was going to get me in the aviation community. It was going to be if you pardon me, but a stupid little airplane that is what takes me out. So I consider that my biggest change, because after that I viewed everything as kind of on borrowed time. I've written about it. I've spoken about it. It is kind of different when you've resigned from your life. If for those that have had that experience, and I've been on some boards of people talk about near-death experience, and yeah, it is gravy now. I mean, everything is extra. So I took that change from almost dying there and not having the best relationship with my wife and my kids, really just because of distance, not because of any tension or anything, just distance, and really changed my focus on, do I want to stay in the military and then go into the corporate world and hardly ever be seen by my family? Or if I'm there, I'm just there to sleep and eat. Or do I want to craft my own future to where I can work from home to be able to strengthen those relationships? And that, not just with the family, but with now friends and other relations, really putting some time and effort into relationships, which I really had not done before. I was kind of climbing that corporate ladder and, just going to get mine up until that point.
If you look back and could change anything, would you have done it differently as far as your career path?
I would always say, I get asked that, and I would say I would not change anything, but I would do it over if given the opportunity. So everything that, because obviously everything happened for a reason to get me to this point today, and I couldn't be happier. Life's not perfect by any means. There's ups and downs, and it rains in paradise. But really, from for all intents and purposes, have an amazing life, amazing family, amazing relationships. And so I wouldn't trade anything, because I would want this. But if I had to do it all over, I would certainly have no fear of navigating both the relationship side and the career side that much smarter, knowing all the stuff that I know now that I just didn't know back then.
So if you can, tell us about that fateful day of the crash and how that incident occurred. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. It was, of all things, it was the night before Mother's Day, was the date of the accident. It was right before sunset. So I'll back that up a little bit. My father, who is retired Air Force, had been building a plane for the better part of 30 years. So he started it way back when he was on active duty, and then it moved. If you're familiar, if you have listeners familiar with military moves, you pack everything up and you move every couple of years, it seems. And so he had built this airplane over the course of several years. He had tried to fly it once, got it airborne for a little bit, and that didn't go all that well. And I'm 50, so to give you some age perspective, he's getting on up there in the years. There are folks that fly up into their 70s and 80s, but not all that many. And most of those who do have flown their whole careers. And my dad didn't do a lot of flying. So as my dad finishes this airplane, and it's up in Ohio, and I'm stationed, I'd been overseas deployed. I came back to the States. I was in Mississippi for a little bit. And then my family, since I was deployed, my family's out in New Mexico. So that I just threw a bunch at you, just think, okay, we're scattered all over the place. So I get in the car, and my mother is concerned about my dad flying the airplane. And the airplane has met all the safety checks that you have to do for experimentals. There's literally 100 checklists that you have to go through. He had done all of that, and it was getting to the point where he had a day identified to fly it. And my mother was concerned that he was, and we joked, and it's not kind of that funny of a joke outside of, you have a sense of kind of a weird sense of humor when you're in the aviation community. But she used to say he's building his own coffin. And I think in her heart, not to speak for her, but I think she always wished that he maybe never finished it. So then we wouldn't be faced with that day where she would have to go through the stress of him flying it. Well, she and I had this idea, and with my dad included, that, hey, why don't I, since I have 2,500 hours and lots of experience doing different airplanes, different things, and I fly almost every day, why don't I go fly it? And in that I was going to be able to fly the airplane and then be able to spend Mother's Day with my mom the next day and then drive on back down to Mississippi. So it was kind of made perfect sense, and we squeezed a Mother's Day trip out of it. So that's what led up to the crash. And when I went out there that day, we did all of our checks. Everything was fine. No issues whatsoever. Got out on the runway, and not to go into too much detail, but when you fly an experimental aircraft, you own the whole runway. So you talk to the tower, and they say, okay, you own everything. So father, who's in a minivan right next to the runway, and then we're talking on the radio to each other. So as I start rolling down the runway, then I'm able to call out airspeeds and different things to him so he can hear me that whole time. So with that, as I'm going down the runway, he's just sitting at the approach end talking on the radio, and he's got another gentleman with him. And what he saw from his perspective was he saw the airplane leave the ground, and then there's kind of a hump in the runway, so he couldn't see the end, but he never saw another airplane basically climb away from the ground there. So that was his perspective. From my perspective, everything was going fine. So it was awesome until it wasn't, is another phrase that I like.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't in a hurry. So in the aviation community, there's certain points along the takeoff to where if the engine quits, no big deal. If it's early, you just stop on the runway.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you've already taken off, you just land on the runway. Or if it's later and you've got some altitude below you, you simply look out in front of you and either circle back to the runway, or you look for a nice flat space or a road or whatever. And it's kind of not that big of a deal to be able to land in front of you. I was kind of right at that point to where I just passed the edge of the runway, and I started to climb out, and the engine quit. So with the airplane, to describe it in words, it basically sank immediately. So instead of being able to point the nose down and glide onto the area below me, the field, if you will, the aft end of the airplane sank. I felt it go out from under me. It felt like literally I was falling out of the sky, because I was. I tried to my best piloting to get myself, to get the nose down. Nothing was working. I just continued all the way down, and I fell probably about 30 feet, almost straight down. I mean, even the forward airspeed was only like 60 miles an hour or so. So it was almost straight down and on into the crash itself. So that was my perspective all the way up through hitting the ground.
Were you ever able to figure out what caused that to happen?
We did. So with any aviation accident out there, whether it's experimental or airline, from anywhere on the spectrum, there's always an investigation. Now, with a smaller airplane, you're not going to investigate as much. And of course, it wasn't a fatality. So, they do an investigation to find the cause, so others can learn, so they don't, it doesn't happen. So others can maybe not be in that same situation. And what had happened is the engine just quit. The carburetor froze over. They didn't go into a whole lot of detail in the report as to exactly why, because it wasn't worth the government's resources to go in there. If I would have died, then they probably would have. But basically, they're like, here's what we found. And that can happen. I would say with an experimental where you're putting different parts together versus, something that comes in a box where you build everything where, all the same parts had something to do with it. So yeah, I would caution folks, if you're building your own airplane, try to build it within a smaller time frame than maybe 30 to 40 years. Because there were a lot of interesting, unique things about the airplane that could have gone wrong. And it was right at the aft center of gravity, which is what led to that sink. It was still within tolerance, but maybe the tolerance wasn't correct when they built the plans in 1970 or whatever. But yeah, it just basically sank out from under me and straight down I went.
Wow, that had to be terrifying.
The movies do a pretty good job of kind of replicating this. So why do I say that? When you think of an action scene to where it's generally not an airplane, a car, say a car flips and it flies up in the air and everything, they go into that slow motion and they show people with their reactions and everything they're trying to do during that time. I would have to agree that time slowed way down. That fall from me out of the sky, I don't know, maybe 3 to 4 seconds, seemed a lot longer. I had plenty of time to what I would consider, be able to shove the stick forward, which is your first reaction as the pilot, is to point the nose down. We'll solve that problem, and then we'll worry about how hard we're going to impact the ground. But if you go in nose first, you have a lot more options than just sinking. Right. And I wasn't able to do that, and I tried to go left and right on the stick to try to tip the airplane over, because instead of just going straight down on my back, basically, I wanted to at least hit a wing first, so that would help mitigate that fall. And if I can hit a wing first, I probably will survive. So really, when the engine quit, it's well, crap, that's not good. Nose forward. No, the nose isn't going forward. And then I felt the sink start. It's like, okay, I better get fancy here pretty quick with what I'm doing. So I tried everything in the book to be able to get something to change. And really at that point, since I was going straight down, the flight controls were moving, but it wasn't changing anything within the airplane. But I do remember having the distinct thoughts of disgust, that I was really, it's ironic that after all my flight time, that this is how I go. Because, to a certain extent, and I don't want to be too dark, but, when you sign up for an aviation business in the military and you can get in places where you're shot at, at some point in time, you can see that, yeah, okay, that can happen.
Right.
We've all been there, either if not affected personally, we know somebody in the squadron or in the unit, that sort of thing, that gets affected. And sometimes it is your time. It has nothing to do with how good or bad you are in the airplane. It is just your time is up, and you become one with that. But then to step out of this high performance mode into a much smaller league, if you will, and then you get, killed in an accident of a small experimental. That was just, I was disgusted. And I remember the last thing I did was I slammed the stick to the side because I was so mad, that this isn't working anymore. I can't get anything to change. So I slammed the stick to the side and I basically resigned. And by that, I mean, I just slumped as the ground, I was super near impact. I know I was running out of time, just basically slumped over and literally resigned to the fact that I'm dead.
And that sounds like it could have been what kept you from dying. Really, if you decided that you were going to just slump over and go limp, they say sometimes an impact that you're not, tense for won't affect you the way it will if you're loose.
It really is. And having been on panels where others are talking, they talk about it's the person that's asleep in the car accident ends up without a scratch. I mean, they wake up a little bit confused as to what's going on since they go from dead sleep to in the middle of an accident.
Right.
But the fact that they aren't tensed helps their body just flop around. Or if you look at children, as horrible as that the thought even is, a child in an accident is better prepared because of they're limp, right? Just there they go. Or the final one, the drunk driver scenario, which is horrible, but the drunk is often the least injured of everybody in the accident because of the loss of what's going on.
Right.
So maybe I don't know. Other questions which are kind of hard for people to ask, so I'll ask it for you so you don't feel rude. Is people are like, seriously, people say, well, didn't you think of your family? And honestly, I did not. I thought about, I need to save my own life because I'm on a pretty small timeline.
Yeah.
And then my aviation humor, the darkness of it kicked in with the irony and then the anger that this is happening. And then basically, time's up at that point. And, fought to just to the very end and then gave up as I hit the ground.
Wow.
As I resigned, I think I closed my eyes. I don't know, but I do remember just that slump as I knew the impact was happening. And of the experience of hitting the ground, I don't remember the thump. That you would think, well, you would remember the thud, right? And I don't, for whatever reason. What I remember vividly is the sound of the airplane. It was already quiet because the engine wasn't working, so had plenty of opportunity to hear every little thing.
Yeah.
And it was the airplane shredding itself, and it's made of wood, all around me. So when you think of an experimental and you think of a small airplane, and I'm 6'5", so I have long legs that are now actually sticking up under the dashboard underneath the engine.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not in a good place for this thing to hit the ground at all, for anything good to happen. But I remember, it's funny because it's not funny. It's interesting because when you strap into almost any airplane, you have the 5-point harness.
Mm-hmm.
So you have shoulder harnesses, basically hip harnesses, and it all comes together in that middle point. Well, I could have later, picked up my 5-point harness because it was perfectly intact. What was missing was the airplane that it was supposed to be attached to at all 4 of those points. So the seatbelt worked. What it was attached to was what shattered. And it was basically the airplane comes apart all around me. So I'm on the ground and I'm covered in gas because I'm underneath the engine. And I hear the airplane shatter above me. And basically the whole weight of the airplane's on top of me.
Mm-hmm.
And much like they teach you in survival in the military, is if you ever get into a situation, this is more for like jumping out of airplanes, or in a combat situation, is after the big thud, is wiggle your fingers and toes and see if you can.
Mm-hmm.
See if they talk back to you like, hey, we're still here. Good news. And then basically inventory from there. And you're kind of accepting that, especially in a bad ejection, that your back or neck are going to be broken.
Right.
So really all you're hoping for is I can feel everything and maybe get some movement.
Mm-hmm.
All that's a plus. And if I get more than that, then it's like, we're on into good news. So I started with that. I could feel my toes. Most of the airplane was on my legs. I don't remember it being on my chest or anything. But I do remember that the fuel, and this was probably from watching too many movies, fuel is running down my face.
Oh.
And of course I just took off. This is right at the end of the runway. So we're full of fuel. And so I'm picturing, your Die Hard or your Fast and Furious type explosions, 40 feet flames in the air. Okay, we had 20 gallons of gas, so maybe not. But put yourself in your situation. It's like, yeah, I am concerned about that. And since I appear to be alive, already good news. I really don't want to sit here and burn, or the worst, is actually survive it and burn to a crisp and then have to, that to me, that's one of the worst ways to go.
Yeah.
It's like, please just make it quick, sir, if it's going to happen. but it's okay, so I'm alive and now I don't want to burn. So next step is I'm going to get out away from this airplane. And I reached out to the grass, and it had rained a little bit earlier in the day and it was kind of misting and it was getting towards sunset.
Mm-hmm.
And the grass is wet. And another thing that maybe saved me from the impact was, ground being a little bit wet.
Yeah.
Maybe a little softer than it would have been. But I was able to reach out and grab the grass and pull myself out from under the aircraft. And as I did that, it was easy to free up my upper body, but my legs were caught. So I just kind of did I'm not all that strong of a person, but I bet I was pretty strong right then, with pictures of fireballs going on in my mind. So pulled myself loose, picked up some pretty nice scrapes and scratches and cuts into my legs from doing that. But basically, I was able to pull myself on my stomach away from the airplane for, about 10 feet or so. And then I didn't really know what to do then, right? In the military, they tell you to run away from an airplane crash. Well, I wasn't really running. So, and they tell you how far to run. You run till you feel stupid.
Yeah.
Well, in this case, I was like, at least I'm not going to. I mean, I look back and I remember seeing the wreckage right there, and the airplane is shattered. It doesn't even look like an airplane. And at that point, I got the great idea that I would try to stand up. So I did, and I flashed back to seventh grade football coach, Coach Laughlin, who one time I asked him, because I used to play tight end and we get hit by a linebacker, and I would lay on the ground and I think I was hurt, and he'd scream at me to get back to the huddle. It was a little different thought process back then. And I did ask him one day. I said, Coach, how do I know if I'm actually hurt? And he said, and he used some expletives and some screaming voice to explain it to me. But if you are hit in football, you pop right up and you walk you run back to the huddle. Right. And if you don't make it, you're hurt.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, that's pretty terrible advice. But, you fall back on what you know. And so I was like, I'll try to stand up. And I was able to stand up, and my back hurt, my neck hurt, and my face hurt a lot. And then my midsection right in the groin area hurt tremendously, but no time to figure out what that would have been. And I started walking back to the end of the runway, which was not too far back there. And I was like, okay. So at that point, I was kind of like switching to different movie mode, like, the fireball in the background and the hero walking away. So I was feeling pretty good about myself then, right? So since I'm not dead, not paralyzed, and so like now you can get the big fireball in the background. It's like, tell me somebody's got a camera rolling, right? But I do remember reaching up to my face and just kind of grabbing olive again. I thought it was gas. It turned out that there was never gas all over me. It was my own blood from cutting my forehead. I had glasses on.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as I hit the glass frames, and I have a picture of the actual frames, cuts around my eyes. So the frames cut into my forehead, and this is a very heavily bleeding part. If you ever cut up in here, don't do it. But if you do get cut up there, it's going to bleed for a while. Mm-hmm. And I'd broken my nose. I had shattered portions of my face. So a lot of blood. And I just remember just kind of going, wiping that away and flicking that off on the ground as I did my best walk to the end of the runway. And as I'm walking to the end of the runway, now to put it from Dad's perspective, he's in a minivan and he's at the other end of the runway. He kind of sees the sun take off in his airplane, and then there's no airplane. So at some point in time, he realizes what's going on, and he maybe accelerates all to the maximum as he's going, 2 miles to the other end of the runway on a taxiway, and basically driving right at me. And I see him coming at me. And, it's a little bit dark, but not super dark. It's just kind of dusky. And he's looking at the airplane. And so here comes this minivan towards the end of the runway. And by the time he sees me and hits the brakes, he just goes sailing right by, because I'm walking back to the end of the runway. And so he's like, so I just remember my dad flying by in a minivan with the person that was with him. And I keep walking. Back to the end of the runway. And when I get to the end of the runway, I hear sirens. So, and I don't know if that was like a 2-minute period, a 5-minute period. Don't really know how long it was, but I do remember hearing sirens, and most airports have fire response teams nearby. So it's not uncommon from a crash site to be able to hear as soon as they flick the sirens on.
Yeah.
But I was back to the end of the runway and I'm on pavement when I remember saying I should probably take a knee, and that's the last thing I remember.
Oh, wow.
until I'm into the hospital chain of events. But yeah, I was like, maybe that tough guy walk back from the crash site was maybe not the best thing to do. Okay. Or the adrenaline's wearing off,
Yeah.
or all of the things that are going on there. I was like, I think I should probably just drop down to a knee here for a second. And then I was on a bodyboard. The next thing I remember, strapped in with the straps across my forehead and everywhere else, if you will.
Wow. How did I mean, not that you can speak for him, but I can't imagine being your dad. How did he feel so guilty, or like what? I can't imagine.
No, those are all good things to talk about and to share. I mean, it's and we've talked about this, and mom too, right? So yeah, he was like, everything from I can't believe, what did I do wrong? That's of course, as the airplane builder is going to be, you're always going to think, okay, what did I do wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Much like I always said, did I do everything I could as a pilot in that situation to save myself, or were there signs I missed along the way up to that point where I could have saved myself? So everybody, second guesses their own role in an event like that. But it's not a joke, but it's my mom saying, well, was thinking that her husband was building his own coffin, and it turned, got dark, very close to her burying her son in that thing.
Right.
So yeah, we don't necessarily bring it up all the time, but we're okay with it, and he knows I speak on it as well. And sometimes he's in the room because he's in aviation clubs here in Texas, and if somebody wants to hear a story of a not so good day in aviation, then I'm willing to tell. And they always ask him questions like that afterwards. It's like, what were you thinking? But what the funniest, again, maybe funny is not the best word, but I would have loved to have seen his reaction in the minivan as he's probably going 100. I mean, you would imagine your child,
Yeah.
oh no, you're not thinking about how fast you're going. Plus, there's no other cars, so I mean, you can go as fast as you want.
Right.
But probably this minivan's rocking 100 going off. And then all of a sudden off the pavement on into the grass. I mean, that could have been a whole nother story.
Wow.
Of what happened on the minivan trip.
So then you forgot everything until you woke up at the hospital. What happened next?
Well, my story is pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
So I wake up and I'm in an ambulance and I'm on a bodyboard. So, which is not a whole lot of fun. I don't think I had ever been on one before. You are strapped down with these Velcro straps, and I have this big horse collar thing around my neck. I couldn't move if I wanted to, other than wiggling fingers and toes. Now everything else is basically locked down. So I get to a hospital. I'm out of the ambulance. So I remember getting out of an ambulance and going into the hospital, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm talking to this doctor or an FAA person, I don't know. Somebody's asking me any questions of what's my name and birthday and all this stuff, and I'm in some decent amount of pain. I know there at some point in time popped some painkillers in me, I'm sure,
Right.
but I don't know. I'm not hooked up to an IV
Mm-hmm.
yet, but I know that. And then I was mistaken because I remember being in the ambulance. Now I'm back in the ambulance. So I'm like, okay, obviously I must have dreamt this go into the hospital, talk to somebody thing, because I'm back in an ambulance. And then I show up and I'm at the hospital. So I kind of take a little nap and I'm at a hospital again, but this one's different. And then they're talking about full body MRI. And it's like, okay, I was a little more coherent this time around. And they said, we're going to, run you through the machine. It's going to standard MRI. It's going to sound terrible. You're going to be in there a long time. Because it's a full body kind of deal. And I'm like, well, I'm not going anywhere, right? Because I'm strapped to a board. So do what you will. And they go in and they take the MRI, which took forever. And then I came back out of that and they got me set up in either the ER or intensive care, I don't know, to where I'm in naturally out of that bodyboard thing and now into an actual chair. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I'm asking my dad, did I take another ambulance ride? And he's like, oh yeah, we went to one hospital first. And then I was kind of like, well, what's this hospital thing? why are we bouncing around? And it was the first one, just for my own benefit, but I just had never thought of this. I went to a hospital and they kind of made sure I was
Mm-hmm.
stable. Um, and then it was secondly, it's like, okay, now he's stable. Let's transport him to a bigger hospital with a more full facility where now they can do the full body MRI and start looking for damage. There was probably 3 to 4 hours of time that went past in that just few seconds of conversation. But that's about all I can account for.
Wow.
And then I wake up and I'm in the hospital bed and, ready for the doctor to come in and kind of deliver the news, if you will, of what damages I had.
Yeah. And you got off pretty good considering
Well,
everything, right?
really blessed that nothing permanent happened
Yeah.
there.
So I have so many questions, but where did you have the, like, they talk about surviving something like that? Did you have the like moment of, oh, my life has bigger purpose, or like that?
Nope.
No.
No. And being on those panels, of course, I have the benefit of hearing other people talk about that. And then, of course, you see how the movies depict
Mm-hmm.
things, right? So, which is, everything from you leaving your body and then coming back into it to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear different people describe it. And we're also human. So there's what really happened. And there's our version of what really
Right.
happened, which nobody else knows. So it's one of those, the human mind can kind of think, so I don't count anyone's recollection of it, including my own, as perfect by any means. It's just kind of, here's what I think I remember very clearly,
Right.
instead of here's what clearly happened. But no, I didn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't have any epiphany as my life is complete and I either should have or shouldn't accomplish more. I never tried to squeeze off a final I love you to my wife or my 2 daughters or my parents. I didn't slow down that much until right at the end. But I do think one thing that was different, that was kind of, as people ask me questions, and I like hard questions. That's so bring it on. But they said it's interesting from a warrior, somebody who is trained as a warrior to fight to the death, that you would be the person that literally says, I gave up. I resigned. So I didn't hit the ground fighting.
Right.
I hit the ground already assuming I was dead. And had I thought I would, I would of course think, well, no, I would try to the last millisecond. Right. And it was, so I don't know, you could probably draw all kinds of conclusions about what kind of person I am because of that. But it was just, it was what it was. And maybe that's what saved me, but I certainly don't think I did it intentionally, because I knew that would increase, there's way too much thought that goes into
Mm-hmm.
that. But I always wondered if I have, fortunately I'll never be in a car accident of that level, but if you're in something that is, where you might be facing I'm probably going to die scenario, if I would resign again for the, basically go limp for the impact, if that's maybe a human nature out there, I don't know.
So interesting. So then after that, you were still in the Air Force. How did that go? Going back to work?
What's funny is I'd actually already flown my last airplane in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
So I was done with military flying. I deployed overseas for a year to the Middle East to work in an operations center in a command and control function. And I'd flown in airplanes, obviously, for being deployed, but for being the pilot in charge, sure, I was basically done. So kind of complete. All my flight records were all wrapped up, and I was just really waiting to retire. This was May of 2013, and I retired in November. So with terminal leave and stuff, I was pretty well out the door.
How did your wife handle it?
Well, probably not earning, the best decision-making husband award ever here, but it is the night before Mother's Day. And I talked to my wife on the drive up there earlier that day, and I said, hey, I'm going to be really busy. She also knows I don't see my parents a lot. So we usually talk every night, but I'd also come from a deployment where sometimes that didn't happen, or if it didn't happen at night, it'd be the next morning because you're on the other side of the world. Right. So we're not in necessarily a habit pattern of always having to talk. So as soon as she didn't get a call that night, which I didn't call, so throw your spears right at me and I'll take them. I didn't call her that night. So by the time, and it doesn't sound so great when you think about the thought process at the time, but it was after midnight by the time things had kind of slowed down enough to go, okay, I know my injuries. We've kind of got a plan. All right, what's going to happen? And I was like, I should call my wife. Well, my cell phone somewhere along the line was in the crash, and I don't know exactly how it got back to me. And when it was probably dead. Um, there's other things. There was a little bag of crash goodies that was brought from the site at some point in time. I don't know who did it. I have no idea. But stuff started showing up at the hospital for me. I was watching clips of myself on the Cincinnati news, so that was obviously not of me, but of the airplane.
Yeah.
Was on the news at the crash site, and then of course it has Lieutenant Colonel Steve Ankerstar, age 43, blah 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 blah, near fatal accident. It's like, come on, it's like, hey, easy, because nobody knows that I'm actually not all that hurt. So you see something like that on TV, and you're thinking, okay, well, he's paralyzed and lost limbs, and you think the worst. So by the time my phone powered up, it's blowing up from friends, and I had not told anybody from my childhood that I was coming back to Ohio because I didn't have time.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I kind of want to sneak in and sneak out and do this. Obviously this was weighing on my mom's mind, so it's like, let's get this taken care of. So I wasn't there to see anybody. And then all of a sudden, everybody sees me on TV. Not everybody, but my friends are seeing me on TV in Cincinnati. Like, well, what's he even doing up here?
Yeah.
Why didn't he call me? So it's after midnight. I'm a little tired. Quite the spectrum of emotions. There's drugs flowing through me from whatever painkillers I'm on and anything. I just don't know. And I did consider. I talked to my dad. I'm like, I should probably call Irene. And I was like, maybe you should call her. And he's like, I don't know that I like that plan. So we collectively, two men in a room, right, decide that, okay, we're not going to make a call. So read that how you will. But so it's now officially Mother's Day. So I'll just wait until the morning. It's not like I'm going to sleep in 8 hours anyway. I'm going to be up and down all night. So I'm like, no, I'll wait till she wakes up in the morning. And then I called at some point in time the next morning to kind of tell her what had happened. And, it's interesting to hear her story, which she does not like to talk about it. And I fully understand that.
Yeah.
So she will not be listening to this. And yeah, it's just one of those. She just, thanks the Lord that she still has a husband after something like that. But in the aviation business, that's one of the unfortunate side effects. But she's also been through a lot, as any military spouse has, that's seen the other half deploy. There's the unknowns and the dangers of the job, and it kind of all goes into it. So very, very resilient woman, but she certainly does not want to necessarily talk about her exact thoughts for my decision to wait until the next morning to call.
Yeah, it's probably not her best day either.
I do remember saying, no, but what's interesting is the news had not traveled, which is different from a lot of times. So think of your normal squadron situation. If something happens in the squadron, everybody knows instantly, right?
For sure.
Well before the news knows, and the rumors, and it's just like, whoa, slow down, right? Well, here it is. I'm not even near my base. I'm back in my hometown, which is several hours away, and my family is a couple time zones away.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and my high school friends aren't necessarily all that, in touch with Irene. So there was never somebody thought that maybe, hey, I wonder if she knows, maybe I should let her know. Of course she knows, because she would magically know these things, right? So literally she woke up the next morning not hearing any of the news stories or any of that, other than a phone call where I'm saying, oh, and by,
So were you terrified to make that call?
No, I wouldn't say terrified.
Okay.
I knew it was probably not going to be met with, and with a, oh, I'm just so glad you're okay, which, those are the kind of words that you would expect, right?
No, probably not.
No, not right. So I know there's probably a lot of head nods out there amongst the listening audience, but no, it was the really, and you didn't call, and and it was, maybe she wasn't the biggest fan of the, hey, why don't I go up there and fly the experimental airplane anyway? Whether she had voiced that or not, I don't actually recall, but I can tell you that if I had a secret ballot for her, I know where I would have to vote. So it was all pretty much like, well, you're alive and it's done with. And So yeah, and it's funny because I did not see her until a few weeks later, and at that point, I'm pretty well healed. I still have my broken nose gear in, but at that point, I looked a lot more normal than I did right then. So she only has pictures to go off of.
Huh. So where has life taken you now that you have put the Air Force behind you?
I would say from what I thought was making me happy and did for a million years, it seems, was being in the military.
Hmm.
That's the way I thought. That's just Mr. Military, mission first. People always, even as a commander, though, there's a mission, 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 mission. There's really nothing more important. Well, now that I'm a little more seasoned, and I see that, okay, when you're outside of the military looking in,
Hmm.
a little different and I get why the military does what it does, but they are, and I'm sure, like we had talked about offline, big corporations. There's some that operate this way too,
Hmm.
and they make sure that they get every ounce of effort that you have to give. They make sure they get it.
Yeah.
So, and I didn't realize I was in that mode myself, to where I was actually kind of living an unbalanced life, if you will. And I thought I was doing the right thing. And then as a commander, now you're the person, regardless of what you feel personally, you are now the person doing that to other families and stuff. And you don't really think you are until you get back to the outside and you're looking in, and you're like, man, I was just mission, 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 drive, drive, drive. And that's just not how the real world is. Now, militaries may need to be that way. But what I thought was the right thing in the military, I found out it's far more satisfying on the outside, and where you can live a balanced life and you can go into mission mode, but you can also separate and go into, family and relationship mode, and do both easily. It's not easy, but you can certainly balance both and get full enjoyment out of your life, versus the military, which kind of demands that you're more mission focused, if you will.
Right. And so now, what are you doing now? Can you tell everyone what you're doing?
Sure. Sure. I'm a financial advisor. So right before I saw Top Gun in high school, which is what made me want to be a fighter pilot, it's cheesy, but it's also true. But I went home and told my parents, and they're like, that's Navy, right? And I'm like, well, I don't want to be in the Navy. I want to be in the Air Force. And he's like, my dad was Air Force. So he's like, yeah, I agree. So after that slight adjustment to the plot of I don't need to wear a white uniform and I don't want to go fly off aircraft carriers, but I was able to focus and make my dream happen. But before that was my dream. My dream was, I watched another cheesy show from the '80s called Family Ties, which had Michael J. Fox. Alex P. Keaton was the character's name. He was nerdy, carried around the Wall Street Journal in a briefcase, and got made fun of. And I actually liked that because he was a little mini investor, right?
Yeah.
So I got into investing in high school. I saw the magic of compound interest. My parents kind of got me started with hey, if you get a job, then we'll match your IRA. And I'm like, I don't really know what you're talking about, but I think I'm hearing free money. And I know, I know from having two daughters that any if you even allude to free money, it's like they can sense that. So I was like, so I make money, I keep it, and you match it into some retirement thing, which I don't care about.
Right.
But I go, but it's mine. So that gives you, years of a head start. So I mentor those that are out there, that if you're in a position to do that, I know not everybody is, but if you have a few dollars you can throw at your kids while they're young. And really the value wasn't the dollars that they put towards my retirement account. The value was the awareness and the education for me as a 16-year-old person,
Mm-hmm.
who now kind of got to see this thing. And I didn't really get it till I was probably 25 or so. But once I got it, I was like, oh, wow, others need to be doing this.
Yeah.
So I went through, and I knew once I got out of the military that I was going to be a financial advisor, and really an investment manager is where I focus my effort. But I'm a certified financial planner as well, so I do help people plan. So that's what I do for my business. And then on the side, largely due to COVID-19 hitting and kind of shutting some business down, I started my own podcast. So I have a podcast called On Time, On Target. So if I like to say that I try to bring some humor to a pretty dry topic, you can be the judge of that on your own. But if you like personal finance kind of stuff and some human motivation stuff, because I do some motivational speaking as well, check out that podcast. I do talk some flying stories on occasion, so you'll either be excited about those or have to suffer through those. But I like it, and I put out new material almost every day. So if you're interested in hearing more, just anywhere you listen to podcast, On Time on Target, and you can find me.
Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing your time and story with us today. It was a joy speaking with you. And if anyone can make a plane crash seem lighthearted, I'm sure that you can make finances seem entertaining as well. The Metamorphosis Podcast is produced by Nora Brucker in Germany and me, Erin Howe, in the United States. Thank you to all of our supporters, and of course, a huge thank you to our guests who are telling us their stories from around the globe about change and life-changing moments. For more information about each episode, check out officialmetamorphosispodcast.com and follow us on Instagram at Official Metamorphosis Podcast for an exclusive look behind the scenes and our guests. We are happy for you to leave your thoughts on each episode, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you. This is the Metamorphosis Podcast with Nora and Erin.